Hey guys, and welcome to MashUp Games. This is a second development video on the game I've been working on, Project Dungeon. And first off, as you can see from the footage, there looks to be a big change in the way this game looks from last month's devlog. That's because I decided to redo a lot of the pixel art, as a lot of it was drawn really quickly for me to use it as a representation of what it could be. So the whole room sprites got readjusted, as well as the size of the room. I made the rooms bigger, as I wanted the player to feel more agile, and if I wanted to achieve this with the rooms I had to either make the player smaller, as in shorter size, or make the room bigger, and I ended up making the room bigger, which works a lot better. And while I was at it, I wasn't much of a fan of the player running animation. I knew that needed some work when I was doing it, so I decided to redo that, and now it looks a lot better. Not only the pixel art has changed, but I've also added some lighting, and I've changed the camera from an orthographic to a perspective one. Another redesign I did was in the player UI. The previous layout felt a bit cluttered, so I decided to change the player view on the right side, and the weapons and clothes equipped instead showing the little circles next to the player view, rather than these big boxes. I also split up the clothing and the weapons part of the inventory into their subsections, and there's now the functionality of selecting and equipping a piece of clothing, although this will not show in the game as of yet. And now what I think is the biggest thing I've managed to do this month is the player attack mechanic. The player can now attack forwards or up, and the player can attack downwards as long as they're not grounded. The damage that the player will deal with this attack is dependent on what sword the player is equipped. The reason the player cannot attack downwards when grounded is not only a design choice, but it also works well with another mechanic I added, which is the player crouch. The player can now crouch down when grounded and cannot move again until they are no longer crouching. Yet another mechanic I made was the player jump mechanic. This is definitely up for re-evaluation later, but for now the player will jump a certain distance for a certain time in the air when the button is pressed. Something I want to change is to have the player jump a different distance depending on how long the jump button is held, but for now this is good. One more thing that I have done is make a new type of object called a fragile object. This can either be a breakable floor or a breakable wall. An example I've added is a target. The player can attack this, and when attacked the fragile object will lose strength and finally get destroyed after enough hits. This implements a health system that I also used for the player, and this health system is also used in, I think, the last thing I've added to this project, which is enemies. Enemies are similar to fragile objects in terms of health and dying, although the enemy can also patrol an area. There is an additional option in the enemy that it can try to avoid the player when patrolling, so it will switch direction if the player is in front of it, and it can also damage the player if they collide with the enemy. So that's all I've managed to do in April. This month is a huge step forward since I had a lot of time to work on this, but I will assume that not every month will have this much done in them. And during this month, I had two major questions I wanted to ask myself coming out of it. The first one was, do I want to continue with this pixel art style, or do I want to maybe try a hand-drawn style? Because I absolutely love hand-drawn games, and I feel like they are definitely something completely different from pixel art games. Take a look at Hollow Knight, that art is really, really nice. Cuphead's style is great, and I want to see if maybe I could do that rather than the simple pixel art. Though I feel like when I need to do that, I need to draw some art and then compare that with my pixel art version and see which one I like better and which you guys like better, which might happen next month. Another question was, do I want to keep the procedural generation? Because when I was brainstorming different types of dungeons, different types of rooms, I was thinking that I could be doing so much more if I had pre-designed the whole dungeon. Because each of these rooms feel like, oh, they're either just going to have an enemy in it or a couple of enemies in it. And you have to make your way through each room, defeat an enemy, move on to the next room. It might feel a bit repetitive. Rather, if I pre-designed the whole dungeon, then it will feel more like Legend of Zelda. Because that's something I really want to take inspiration from. The exploration and figuring out some sort of puzzle aspect and some challenge in terms of platform. Now I do want to see if maybe I could implement the two, half of it procedurally generated and the other half pre-designed, and mix the two somehow, but I don't know, that's again another decision. But that might be a decision I might have to make down the road. Once I have most of the mechanics there, then I can actually add the beef of the game and see if that is something I want to do. If you want to know more about the development of this, then I've recently set up a Discord server for this YouTube channel. It will be a place where I'll be posting updates to the game I make when I make them, so you'll be a lot more up to date throughout the month rather than a devlog at the end of each month. It's also a place where you can make your own suggestions for the game, or talk about the game, or this channel, or just discuss game development in general. I want it to be a place where people feel a lot more inclined to interact with me as well as the community, rather than through the YouTube comments section. I can guarantee that if you ask me a question on the Discord server, I am much more likely to respond quicker than I am if you do it in the YouTube comments section. I also just participated in the Ludum Dare game jam, which ended yesterday, and I will be uploading a video for the game I made on that pretty soon. But that's it. And of course, if you have liked this video, then please like and subscribe. This is MashUp Games, signing out.